Now let me introduce Ron Shive. Reverend Dr. Ron Shive is senior pastor at First Presbyterian Church in Burlington, North Carolina. Ron grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, studied at Auburn University, Dallas Theological Seminary, Erskine Theological Seminary, and holds the D-Min degree from Union Theological Seminary in Richmond, Virginia. Ron served pastorates in South Carolina prior to being called to First Presbyterian Church in Burlington. Ron was moderator of the Middle East Study Group, which presented its report to the 2010 General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church USA, and that remains the centerpiece of current PCUSA Middle East policy. Ron has led many tours to Israel-Palestine and reads widely in this area of interest. Ron, we're so glad to have you with us. Please join me in welcoming Ron. Is there a mic? You use that mic or use this one? Yeah. And pull that off.
Mark, thank you. It is a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I do hope that each of you have the handout. It actually is the letter of the 15 church leaders. I will be referring to that, so if you don't have a copy, raise your hand, and we'll try to make sure we get you one.
Does anyone not have a copy? Just raise your hand.
You have just heard a presentation arguing for unconditional and continuing U.S. military aid to Israel. And after I speak, you will hear an argument for the unilateral cessation of U.S. military aid. This afternoon, I will be speaking from a middle ground position, and that is providing conditions on U.S. military aid to Israel. The position that I present is also the position of the Presbyterian Church USA. And although I speak this afternoon, I do not speak officially representing the Presbyterian Church. I have been involved, though significantly, in the development of our social witness policy with regard to the Israel-Palestine conflict during the past 5 years. It was in October of 2012 that 15 leaders of Christian churches and organizations, including the Presbyterian Church USA stated clerk, Grady Parsons, thank you, joined together in signing a letter in which they called on Congress to condition U.S. military aid to Israel upon Israel's compliance with applicable U.S. laws and policies. These leaders include Baptist, Lutheran, Catholics, Presbyterians, Methodist, Orthodox, Quaker, and other major Christian groups. And they all agree that unconditional U.S. military assistance to Israel has contributed to sustaining the conflict and undermining long-term security interests, both of Israelis and of the Palestinians. In the letter, the following request is made, and you'll find it in the yellow highlighted text on your handout. We urge an immediate investigation into possible violations by Israel of the U.S. Foreign Assistance Act and the U.S. Arms Export Control Act, which respectively prohibit assistance to any country which engages in a consistent pattern of human rights violations and limit the use of U.S. weapons to internal security or legitimate self-defense. More broadly, we urge Congress to undertake careful scrutiny to ensure that our aid is not supporting actions by the government of Israel that undermine prospects for peace. We urge Congress to hold hearings to examine Israel's compliance, and we request regular reporting on compliance and the withholding of military aid for non-compliance. The question is why? Why condition U.S. military aid to Israel, and why is it important? Well, let me suggest several reasons. First, to not investigate would be to hold Israel to a lower standard than we hold every other country that receives U.S. aid. Examples of Israel's specific systematic violation of human rights related to U.S. military aid are highlighted in the blue portion on page 3 and 4 of your handout. They include, among other things, the killing of unarmed civilians, suppression of legitimate political expression, home demolitions and forced displacement, use of prohibited weaponry in densely populated civilian areas, and the restriction of Palestinian movement. President Obama was in Jerusalem on March the 21st, and boldly he addressed some of Israel's human rights violations and violations of international law. When he spoke to that Jerusalem University student audience, he received overwhelming affirmation. I'd like to read a portion of his address. It's not fair that a Palestinian child cannot grow up in a state of their own, living their entire life with the presence of a foreign army that controls the movements, not just of those young people, but their parents, their grandparents, every single day. It's not just when settler violence against Palestinians goes unpunished. It's not right to prevent Palestinians from farming their land or restricting students' ability to move around the West Bank or to displace Palestinian families from their homes. It is critical for Israel to comply with laws that regulate the use of U.S.-supplied weapons, since Israel has been and is the largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid since World War II. Notably, the United States has initiated investigations of violations with other countries and on numerous occasions has withheld U.S. aid. And some of the countries to which we have withheld U.S. aid have been our close allies. Consider Turkey, 1974, Indonesia, 1975, Pakistan, most recently in October 2010, Bahrain in February of 2012. The list could go on, and we would include other countries like Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Argentina, Zimbabwe, the Philippines. And indeed, Israel needs to be one of those in which we investigate. Since 2001, several requests have been made by members of Congress to investigate violations with regard to Israel, but to no avail. I'd like to suggest to you that it's now, based on the evidence at hand, time to investigate whether violations are currently occurring. To not investigate would be to hold Israel to a lower standard than we hold other countries of the world. Second, I'd like to suggest that we need to condition our U.S. military aid, because Israel does need to know that the U.S. is not only supportive of its right to exist, but the U.S. is seeking to provide for its security in the midst of a hostile environment of the Middle East. Unilaterally ending U.S. military aid would clearly damage this end. However, so is our unconditional support. Our unconditional support enables Israel to continue in its self-destructive ways and in its oppression of the Palestinian people. It's not good for Israel, and it's not good for Israel's long-term security in the Middle East. Third, I'd like to suggest that unconditional military aid to Israel is passively encouraging Israel to continue their violation of international law and is supporting them in their continued settlement development in the West Bank. Moreover, it is making you and me complicit in Israel's illegal and immoral activity. The letter of 15 states, it's the gray highlighted area, we see a troubling and consistent pattern of disregard by the government of Israel for U.S. policies that support a just and a lasting peace. Do these accusations not at least warrant an investigation? And if the investigation substantiates the allegations, then in the name of justice, how can the United States Congress do otherwise than to suspend U.S. military aid to Israel until Israel complies with the application of human rights towards the Palestinian people in the West Bank and in Gaza? Fourth, I'd like to suggest to you that we need to condition our U.S. military aid to Israel, because this is a firm and a nuanced position of conditional aid that stands with both the Israelis and with the Palestinians. It seeks to be balanced by applying the same moral principles to both sides of the conflict. The Palestinian people have not been totally innocent, as they have sought to resist and to even overthrow the occupation. And the response of the U.S. has been to prohibit aid to the Palestinian Authority at times. Today, assistance to the Palestinians is arguably the most conditioned, the most restricted, most audited, and most monitored U.S. aid program in the world. And sometimes the United States government simply withholds promised money because we don't like a political action that was taken. For instance, last fall, Congress withheld $295.7 million to punish the PA for upgrading its status at the United Nations. This is clearly conditioning U.S. aid based on a dislike for a nonviolent political action. Surely we must insist on a balanced approach and apply the same moral standards to both sides of the conflict. We must firmly stand with both our Jewish and our Palestinian brothers and sisters, for they are both our friends. Presbyterians and Jews have worked very faithfully and diligently together for over half a century, and we have developed a very close relationship. And it is that mutual friendship that indeed has allowed us cooperatively to address many moral and ethical issues that are confronting our society. At the same time, we have even a longer friendship with our Palestinian Christian partners in the Middle East. And while we will always stand with both of our friends, wanting both to thrive, sometimes it is necessary to support the weaker friend when the weaker friend is suffering at the hand of the stronger. Now, this reminds me of an incident that took place in my junior high years. My friends to this day all refer to it as simply the fight. It occurred at Delwood Junior High School in Chattanooga, Tennessee in 1969. I was in the 9th grade at the time, and my young friends and I were in the 6th period gym class. We had just concluded a very close game of softball on a warm, hot spring day. The tensions were high. The anger had not really abated after a close call at third base that concluded the game. We were making our way from the softball field back up to the gym, walking up a long hill. And two of my best friends, who had been involved in the call at third base, were bantering back and forth as we made our walk up the hill. The argument indeed continued the whole way, when suddenly, to my horror, my two friends were in a fist-flying, heart-pounding, nose-blood-gushing fight. And even to this day, I'm sure that if you ask my friends who started it, you would hear opposing narratives. But in that moment in 1969, that was not the only important question. There was a more important question that should have been asked that day. And the more important question was simply, what should I do? You see, one of my friends was a normal-sized 9th grader, 5'6", 135 pounds. He was an incredible tennis player, but he wasn't much in the weight room. My other friend, well, he was not only a 5'11", 8th grader, he was already one of those chisel-chested hawks who indeed wrestled heavyweight at 185 pounds. Now, while my smaller friend indeed raised the anxiety of my stronger friend, he posed no existential threat. But on the other hand, in that moment, I genuinely feared for the health of my weaker friend. What would you have done? In that moment, I was faced with a public and moral decision, maybe my first, but definitely not my last. What should I do? I wish that in that adolescent moment that I had known the words of two ethicists of the day. William Sloane Coffin says, not to take sides is to effectively weigh in on the side of the stronger. And Miroslav Volf says, neutrality is positively harmful. I pray that Muslims and Jews and Christians indeed will remember those words as we seek to find a common ground to stand for and to advocate for, and yes, to even demand a just peace in the land that we call holy. While Israel boasts of being a democratic society, its clear violations of international law, its disregard of basic human rights in the occupied territories clearly demonstrate that it's abusing its superior strength. When one stands for one's weaker friend, you are not seeking to vilify the other. You're not seeking to reduce the stronger to a caricature of evil. You're not seeking to tear down the stronger. No, when you condition your military aid so that you're no longer enabling your stronger friend to beat down your weaker friend, you're not exploiting this tactic to tell an anti-Israel story that undermines Israel's right to exist. You're not delegitimizing Israel. No, you're simply saying, enough is enough. Stop it. Both of these Chattanooga boys continue to be my friend. But on that warm spring day, I wish that I had jumped in. I wish that I had helped to restrain the flying arms of my stronger friend. I'm not sure what you would have done if you had been in Chattanooga, Tennessee on that warm spring day in 1969. But what will you do today? Yes, we do have two friends, and we stand with both of those friends because both of those friends are created in the image of God. And as a person of faith, my faith tells me I must stand with both. But I also must stand with my weaker and say to my stronger friend, enough is enough. It's for these reasons that I strongly advocate conditional U.S. military aid to Israel.